If people are all right, so it's the day after Shavuos, Tafshin Tet, and we are learning Shmuel chapter 8, verse 5, and this is a very important chapter in Jewish history. This is the chapter where we are switching from judges to kings. And naturally, because we are switching systems of government, there are many implications and many issues that needs to be discussed and understood. And I think what we'll do today is more of a King's 101. We'll try to understand the differences between judges and kings, and what is really what does this transition entails. And in the process, we'll try to understand why Shmuel was upset with the Jews for asking for it. So let's just read. We're going to read really only two psukim today, 5 and 6. So pasuk 5 is we're talking about we are joining Shmuel when he is old already, and therefore he cannot make the rounds around the country to judge the people. He was extremely influential. The Jews really straightened out from their olden days, the olden ways of idol worship and not listening to God's commands, and they for 10 years they were really doing the right thing, so to speak. His sons, Shmuel's sons, had two sons. They were I guess lower level judges in the city of Beersheba, and he put them there with the hope that they'll grow into being the leaders after him, but they didn't, at least not yet. And they liked money, and they were playing a little bit. They were trying to make a living more than they were trying to judge. And as a result, the people really didn't go for them and didn't totally like them. So they all gathered. All of the leaders of the Jewish people, other than Shmuel, gathered. All of the elders of the Jewish people gathered and made the trip to Shmuel home in the Ramah, which is north of Jerusalem. And this is where we meet verse 5. Vayomru elav, so they told him, Hine ata zakanta, you are old, uvanecha lo alchu bidrachecha, and your sons did not follow your footsteps. Ata sima lanu melech leshaftenu kechol hagoyim. So now they're talking to him in disrespectful fashion. Simalan, they're giving him an order. 2 fries and a king, basically. We want the king now, and you're just going to do it for us.
In other words, they weren't willing to wait until he died, and then
they weren't willing to consult with him. He is the leader of the Jewish people now. How about, invite him and ask him, what do you think, Mr. Shmuel? Should we, shouldn't we? What are we going to do when you're gone? Moshe Rabbeinu took care of the line of the succession, the line of succession, by putting in place Yoshua. So why can't Shmuel do the same thing? For sure he can. And so they came with the preconceived notion that they want a king, and Shmuel is going to give it to them.
Did Moses like Joshua, or Hashem told Moses?
Moshe very much like Yoshua. Yoshua was his student, his best student. He was his shamish. He was there in the tent with Moshe all the time. He went halfway up the mountain with him. You know, he was really his second in command while he was alive, while Moshe was alive. But then he made sure that everybody knows that he's the next one. So they wanted a king, and they added this word l'shaftenu kechol hagoyim, that they wanted a king to judge us like all the other nations, which gives us a hint of why the next pasuk is vayara davar b'nei Shmuel. Shmuel didn't like it. Kasher amru tna lanu melech l'shaftenu. But here, this is very strange. We think that the problem was that it was like all the nations, right? But see, what the next verse is saying, that Shmuel didn't like it, that they asked him, a king, to judge us. So what's the problem? You know, if it's not the Kol HaGoyim problem, if it's not like all the other nations, so what is the problem?
He didn't say give us a king to rule over us. He said give us a king to judge us.
Exactly.
That's the judges.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he's a judge, and they basically told him, you know, we want another judge. But Shmuel played game, you know, played ball. Vayitpalel Shmuel el Hashem, and he prayed to God to see what God's opinion. You know, he didn't go to God and demand things, but he asked God what's his opinion. Okay, I think, in order to understand a little more of what's going on here, we do need to understand the basic of kings versus judges. And I gave here a sheet. The sheet is 7 verses from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 17, verse 14 and on. These are the verses that are discussing the commandment of a king, and we're going to go through it very carefully because, as we said earlier, this is the chapter where we're changing the system to the system of kings, and there are a lot of implications. So let's see what's going on here. Let's just get the basics and grow with that. So where are those 7 verses written? They're written in the Parashah of Shoftim, Parashah of Judges. Okay, the parashah is starting. The portion of that week starts with the word Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol she'arecha. Right, that God is commanding the Jews to put up judges and cops and police officers. In everywhere, and v'shaftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek, in order for the judges to judge the people. So the main authority and the main responsibility of the judges was to judge the people, to make sure that they go according to Torah law. And as we learn, and which we're not going to do right now, but as you look at this parasha, they got some teeth. They have the ability to use the cops, the police officers, to force the Jews to do things, and they are allowed to create fences. What is a fence? You know, in order for us not to fall off the cliff, we make a fence, 20 yards before the end of the cliff, so we're not even going to get close to the. So the same thing. If we're not allowed to do something on Shabbos, we're restricting further items so we don't get close to the real thing. So now the shoftim also. How do you identify who is a legitimate or qualified judge? Is because their knowledge, a level of knowledge in Torah, right? And their sons also have the first right not right. It's not up to them, but they have the first. They would be offered if they're worthy. They would be the first to be offered the job. But so from that perspective, there is no difference between judges and kings. What we did see in the past 400 years, judges really, the kids of the judges did not take their places. Not even one that we know. So we see that, and on the other hand, kings, it's always the son or the grandson or someone from the lineage. Now, into that background that states that the system of government is based on judges, comes this verse 14 that says "Ki tavo el haaretz." Ki means when you will come to the land. Asher el haaretz asher Hashem Elokecha noten lach, the land that God is giving you. What happens? V'yirishta v'yashavta ba, and then you're going to fight for it, and you're going to kick the people that don't belong over there out, and you're going to be sitting there. There's no mention of a king yet, right? We would think that why would you need a king? You would need a king to lead you in war, right? To make sure that we get what we need. But we see here in the Torah a clear, it's clearly not the case, because all the wars and getting the land is happening before we have a king. So when we come to the land and we conquered the land already and we sat there, ve'amarta asima alai melech kechol hagaim asher svivotai. Wow. So you would say that I would want a king like everybody else around me. So is it a premonition? Is it because this was said 400 years before that, right? Is this a commandment to follow? I mean, this is really not. And why do we need it if we already are sitting in our land and we have everything? We conquered the land. Why do we need this king now? What's the story here? So there is a lot of commentary and a lot of oral law written about this, and the summary of it is as follows. Kings, by and large, are just like judges. They have the same responsibility. Moreover, the judges will continue to be judges even after the kings are there. So the kings are sort of extra.
Are they above the judges?
They are above the judges.
So if a judge says something,
So
the king could go against it?
Well, the king no judges nor kings are allowed to change the ruling of Torah. The halakha of Torah. That's not up to them. We'll see.
So this sounds like there was a separation of churches.
There is. So the point is, the rabbis are telling us, because king can do a lot of this job better, because he has mora'ah shel malchut, he has fear, he has an army, he has prisons, he has a power that a judge cannot throw someone in jail. They can say that they should go in jail, but they need the cops to do that. A king comes with the cops already built in. So, and the king also, throughout history, had a lot of respect, royalty. It's beautiful. The red coats, Buckingham Palace. It's beautiful. You go there. It's meaningless to us in this day and age somehow, but it was for thousands of years. It was really bringing respect to the country, and the more guards that the king have, and the bigger the palace the king has, the more respect the country had. That's the way it used to be, and to a certain degrees also now. I mean, now it's not guards; it's how many airplanes you have, or
What about the possibility of corruption, or the son of a king could be corrupt?
That is the landmine of a king. The landmine of a king is that the job comes with a lot of possibility for corruption, a lot of landmines, a lot of possibility to veer off. It's very difficult to stay straight. It's very, very difficult, and we saw throughout the years that the kings didn't do a good job at that. You know, for one reason or another, almost all of the kings, except David himself, King David himself, they all did something wrong. So that
He did too.
he did not.
Took too many wives.
Not King David.
Solomon had
Too many wives.
Solomon, okay.
So
He sent some of the battles.
So the point is that there are rabbis that are of the opinion that a king is optional. That this commandment is not a commandment to, yes, you must have a king. And the proof is that as soon as we conquered the land, Yeshua conquered the land, 14 years, it took 7 years to conquer, 7 years to divide. He did not anoint a king. He continued, and when he passed away, some other judge came about, Atniel, etc. So it seems that everybody agreed, at least for 400 years, that it's not a must. So what happened now? The Jews at that time, because they were at a higher level than a whole lot of other generations before them, they came back, they did tshuva, they followed what Shmuel did. They felt that the time is ripe for a king. That there are a lot of candidates throughout the time of the judges. One of the main problems was that there were no candidates. There were no worthy people, and the people of Israel sort of faded into learning from the surrounding nations. They started learning their ways, and there was no one who took charge. And after 7, 10, 20 years, somebody came about and gathered the troops and got them out of the mud and straightened them out for a certain period of time. But then when he passed away, it went, there was nobody else to take their place. So now, why is the commandment here indicating that we should conquer the land before the king comes about, before putting together a king, before anointing a king, before selecting a king? So the reason is because when we do war, we need to have our eyes to God, not to some human being that will save us. And if we trust the human being, this is where things go wrong. And on the other hand, for the king themselves, if they experience a great win, a great victory, they can start thinking, "Oh, I'm actually good at that." Maybe it's coming to me, rather than being totally a vehicle to God's will. Now, one of the other things that we learn from this verse is that the Jews have to initiate the call for a king. Usually, in Judaism, there are a certain set of circumstances. You have You know, you have a certain field that grows a certain crop, and the harvest comes. So you need to do certain things with the produce. When you have a child, you have to do certain things. There are certain circumstances that dictates to you what the mitzvah, what the commandment, what you need to do. Here, it's not a commandment that there are some restrictions, there are some outside limitations. One of them is we needed to have the land already, we needed to conquer the land, but the event that starts the chain to get to a king starts with the request from the Jews that they should say we want. They need to feel it. They need to feel that it's time. They need to feel that they want it, and we see that this is what happened in at the time of Shmuel. So it's a really strong question. Why was he upset? You know, if this is what's supposed to be, right? Now, of course, the Jews are asking for the king, but after the king is a king, he doesn't need consent anymore. Democracy is out. So it's democracy until there is a king, you know. So it's very, very important to understand that the king doesn't have a term limit. A king comes in and they remain a king forever. Now, what is Kechol HaGoyim? The problem with Kol HaGoyim, with all of the nations around, is that in those days when the Torah was given, there was no one constitution, no one system of government. The King Og was doing thing one way, and King of Egypt doing it another way, and King of Jericho doing a third way. They all had there was no set way. And some kings thought to themselves that they're also a religious authority. The king of Egypt, Pharaoh, thought that he is God. No less. So what does it mean? So the rabbis are telling us what it means here, that the kingdom, the throne is going from father to son, and they are going to set rules, basic rules of government, not specific rules like a specific nation, because you couldn't really get a consensus from the nations, but just to set civil society according to Torah law. So that is the only thing that was really equal, that was similar amongst all of the kingdom around the Jewish people at the time, to create civil society and to lead the wars when there is a reason for it. But one of the reasons that time did not come yet, and that's one of the reasons that Shmuel was upset, is that we didn't conquer all of the land yet. Yoshua, as we recall, fell short of conquering the entire land. We had the Philistines, we had some of the Amorites, we had certain pockets in certain areas that were not right. There were certain areas in certain that had some other stronghold of other nations, and so it was not really time yet. Now, the next verse in Shoftim is saying, "Som tasim alecha melech," and this is after the Jews are expressing the need and the desire to have a king. Now it becomes a strong commandment. Now you have to do it. And there are two opinions here, and the opinion and the two opinions are, which we mentioned before, is whether it's a positive commandment or an optional commandment. But Som Tasim, once you do it according to the to the opinion that it's optional, what's so strong here? It's that you have to set it up, and once you set it up, it's you can't take it away. It's now another difference besides the fear and the army and the executive branch that the king brings with them. There is one more difference between a judge and a king, and that is that the king can impose more taxes than the judges can. The judges have certain things that they can do, but not too much. A king can basically do anything. Eminent domain, they can come in and take, they can take your land. A judge cannot take your land. A king can take your land. A judge cannot decide that all 15-year-olds are going to work in the palace. A king can. So the king has a lot more authority and a lot more power than the judge, but nonetheless, the judges still maintain the responsibility to lead the nation and to be the judicial system. Now, a couple other things that we learn from this verse, from the second verse, that a king, it says, so it says here, "Asher yivchar Hashem Elokecha bo." This is very interesting, that we have to put a king. It's a king that the Jews will select, but it's also a king that God agrees, that God selects as well. So there need to be a meeting of the mind, so to speak. What the king that we want has to be approved by God. We cannot take someone who is a hoodlum and expect God to say, yes, that's a good king. Now, so again, it's a very strange transition, because who is selecting the king? The authorities of the king is coming is derived from whom? From the people or from God? So it derives from God, but the people has to select first and make sure that God agrees. Mikerev achecha, we learn from it that a king cannot be from another nation. We cannot follow another king. We cannot select someone from the area that is a strong guy and we say, you know what, let's follow this king, because that is bound to fail. It's bound to take us away from the ways of Torah, and it's totally not allowed. And we cannot even make a non-Jew in charge, not as a king, but as in a position of power. We're not allowed to do it. Lo tuchal latet alecha ish nochi. You shouldn't be putting on top of you someone who's not. Asher lo achicha hu, more so even a convert is not allowed to be a king, because a convert is on probation for the rest of their lives. Because if they go back to their old ways, they lose their status as a convert, which is very, very, very interesting, because Ruth, who is the great-great-grandmother of David, was a convert. But after a few generations, even after one generation, that problem goes away. But that was the problem with David. They didn't want David to be a king. Some people, because that's where he came from. He came from a convert. Now, while we at it, there are several other interesting conditions. Yeah.
The first part of this pasuk says Hashem has to approve or choose. Why do you need the rest of this? It doesn't matter nothing else matters. Hashem is choosing.
That's the point. It's not the kind of thing that is spoon-fed. It's not like a Navi. It's not like a prophet. That God selects the prophet and send the prophet to you, and you need to start the process. The Jewish nation, the people need to start the process, which is exactly what happened. Which is why we all ask, what was wrong with it? If they start the process properly, what was wrong with it? Shmuel also did the proper thing. He went to God and said, do you agree? Right? Palel Hashem, right? He prayed to God. What do you think about it? Now, this is an interesting thing here that I think we should just cover while we're at it. A king is not allowed to increase to have multiple horses. What do you mean? Why horses? In those days, horses were used as the main vehicle in a war, and horses were also used as in sports, and horses were also used to status. Now, till this very day, an Arabian horse is the best horses, right? And kings used to have many horses. So I don't know, someone like Jay Leno cannot be a Jewish king because he has too many cars. You know, so but horses that are needed for war, that's no problem. The only problem is to have multiple horses for just the sake of having multiple horses. And one of the reasons why we shouldn't allow a king to collect horses is because that is almost a guarantee that they will bring back the people to Egypt. Because what used to happen then is people from other nations would buy a plot of land in Egypt and will buy a farm and will raise horses there. So they will have the king's man of Scandinavia in Egypt raising horses in Egypt for the king of Scandinavia. So you're allowed to go back and buy a bag of beans or do some other commerce, some other transactions in Egypt, but not horses, because horses require a long time. That you need to be there to grow, to train, and we don't want to go back to that place, to Egypt. And it says, "Leman arbot lo sus." We shouldn't be doing this because the king will bring us back to Egypt in order to increase. And it says, "Sus," one horse. Why? Because the prohibition is on every single horse. It's not just lots of horses. If for every horse that the king is sending someone to buy in Egypt, for every single horse he's getting a sin. An infraction. And God promised us, as soon as we came out of Egypt, He promised us that we're not going to go back in that way. So there are those who say that not only you're not allowed to go to Egypt, you're not allowed to go through that way, which is through the desert. So if you take a Dreamliner, it's easier, but to go through, and in those days, that's really that and the sea were the only two ways of going down back to Egypt. And we said that we should not. God was promising us not to go, that we're not going to go back there. So the king should not be doing just that.
What about Herod?
What?
About taking a king from your own people and not set a foreigner over you. So was Herod a legitimate king?
So that was a problem, but Herod went through Giyur.
But you said a convert.
Correct. This was a problem. It was a problem with Herod. Yeah, that was one of the problems with Herod. But Herod was the king with the sword, and he didn't really ask you too much. He was just, ruling over you. So it's not like you had a choice. V'lo yarbe lo nashim, and he should not have multiple wives. So now, in the age of Me Too, it's really touchy to talk about it, but I'll just state what. So first of all, 1,000 years ago, the law came down from Rabbeinu Gershom that every Jew should marry only one woman. So that's been the law for the past 1,002 years. So that's number one. But before that, it was allowed. Simple, regular people, commoners, were allowed to have as many wives as they wanted. The only one that we're not allowed to is the high priest, who allowed only one, and the king, who allowed only up to 18.
How many?
18.
18.
You want to be a king?
Long life.
Do you want to be a king?
Total life.
And why? And they say why you should not have multiple women, because v'lo asur levavo, because the potential of him finding someone very beautiful, and which is not exactly up to spiritual level, is possible. And the more he goes around, the more he can go off the path. And the halacha is that even if somebody married the wrong person, he's as far as kings are concerned, is not exactly the right thing to do for a king. Another thing very interesting, that a king is not allowed to just sit there and accumulate wealth. They're supposed to be wealthy so they can be bribed and etc. They cannot be controlled. But just to sit and increase, to just pile up the cash in the bank, that's not good. A commoner is allowed to do it. Go ahead, make business, do business, and be the wealthiest person on earth, no problem. A king is not allowed to do that, which is very, very strange. And it doesn't even tell us why, but it's sort of obvious because there are a lot of when someone has too much money, they start thinking that they're in charge of the world, and they start permitting themselves to do all kinds of things that they shouldn't. So, what?
I won't have to worry.
You wouldn't have to worry about that. Because wife number 17 will keep you in check. All right, and what else does he need to do? As soon as he sits on the throne, he needs to write himself a Sefer Torah, 2 of them, 2 books. One of them will stay in his treasury, and one of them he's going to go with all the time, and it needs to be an easy to carry. It's a book in an easy to carry format, so you can look at it all the time. And the book has to be written and edited and confirmed by the Kohanim and Leviim, the wise man of the Jewish people needs to confirm it, because it's very difficult to sit and copy hundreds of thousands of letters and not make a mistake. They needed to confirm that. And he needs to read in it all his life, and he needs to learn from it. And the next 2 psukim are giving us reasoning for it, 2 positive reasons and 2 negative reasons. The 2 positive reasons, so he can learn to fear God and to keep all of the commandments of the Torah, and in order for him not to be haughty. It's very easy for someone who's a king and has sitting in a palace and has a couple of limousines to feel good about themselves and start treating their brothers like dirt. And the 2 other reasons, and the other reason is in order they need to keep learning Torah in order to stay straight in the path. And the last one, in order for them to perpetuate their their lineage, the sons are going to take after them. They must learn Torah all the time. So that's very very attractive ways of being a king. You have to walk around with a book and learn all the time, and not allowed to have what a lot of rich people can have. They can have a lot of horses, and they can have a lot of women. They can have whatever they want, and you can't. So that keeps a person a little bit in balance. Now, before we finish, I just wanted to quote from the Gemara, and I don't know if we have time. When is Mincha?
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay. So I just quote from the Gemara something very interesting. There were 3 commandments. 3 commandments that we were given after we entered the land of Israel. One of them is to put a king, then to get rid of Amalek, then to build Bet HaMikdash. And those we got a whole bunch of other commandments that has to do with the land of Israel. All of the commandments that has to do with with agriculture and Bet HaMikdash. Obviously, those are all commands that can be done only in the land of Israel, Shemitah and Yovel and all of those. But those are commands, those are mitzvot for individuals. They're not commandments for the community, for the nation. The only 3 commandments for the nations, according to most, are those 3 commandments. Now, what is the sequence? The sequence is very interesting. The sequence has to be as follows. First, you have to have a king. And the king has to come after you conquer the land. All but Amalek. And one of the verses when we are commanded to get rid of Amalek is Ki yad al kes ya milchama l'Hashem dor vador, that the commandment is that we have to have this war when we have the throne of God, when we have God's throne. What is God's throne? So there is another verse when we describe the throne of King Solomon, we describe it as the throne of God. So the throne of the king is the throne of God. That it means that in order to get rid of Amalek, we need to have a king first. And then there is the commandment to create a temple, to create a house for God. And the way he says that over there, when are you going to build the temple? You're going to build the Beit HaMikdash after all of our enemies let us, God help us to win against all of the wars against all of our enemies, and that includes Amalek. So we have a clear indication of the sequence of events. And another thing that is very interesting with this mitzvah, with this commandment to build a temple, there too, God is telling us that we have to select the place. We have to select the place, and God has to agree to it, just like a king. So those 2 main important things in the life of a nation, the king and the temple and the Beit HaMikdash, has to be selected by us, and God has to be agreeable. After we learn, we understand how kings work, I think we have even a stronger question of why Shmuel didn't like it. It seems like it's the right time. It seems like the people are asking for it. It seems like they're all, we got as much land as we can. So why not now? Why wait? We'll talk about it next time.